Okay, it's showtime, everybody. That's what it told me on the screen. Welcome to Moto Talk with Steve and Kim. I'm Steve, and that's Kim over there. We are going to talk about... I've still got Skylar's name on there.
We're not going to talk about Skylar
We ain't
anymore.
going to talk about no Skylar.
Although I'm going to tell a story before we get started. My daughter
that.
said that can't possibly be his real name.
Skylar Blades.
I know. That's what I said. What else would it be?
I went motocross with him yesterday, and he was doing really well. But I said, "You have a name you could use for anything."
Yeah.
I mean,
it'd be a great superhero.
I'm going to change
an ice skating superhero.
Yes, it would.
That's absolutely what we'll do. We'll get him a tutu.
I don't even remember where I changed that name at. Oh, here it is. Now we're getting there. It's Carb Day.
Yeah, we're going to have donuts.
And it's past Carb Day. So, yeah, we're going to talk about carburetors today. But before that, I was just going to mention again, hey, Matthew,
happy birthday, John Hill.
John. Is it John's Hill birthday?
It is. John's birthday today. I'm sure he's 55.
Caleb, you know what I keep forgetting to do? I'm going to go over to my Facebook page right now because I have a bunch of friends that watch it on my page. And my page, the comments don't show up in the live feed. So I'm going to go down to that real quick and see what's going on. I don't see it anywhere.
Yeah, I don't either.
Oh, well.
Not that important.
We failed. Okay. Yeah. Hey, everybody that's saying hi on my page.
Good night, everyone. See you later.
So, okay. Mid-Ohio is coming up. I think it's the 23rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. The 24th, 5th, 6th is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I always forget whether it's Wednesday's load in and then Thursday's
first day they let anybody. Well, no, Thursday's the first day for vendors.
Thursday's vendor day,
and then Friday's people.
That's when
Saturday's
all the good
people,
stuff
Sunday's
gets bought
people.
up,
right?
And then Friday is when the population or it's open to the public. The public can come in and get that. Hey, yeah. Ron Mahoy.
It was your birthday, the day before yesterday.
That's the
Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Yeah, 4th of July firecracker. So, yeah, we're going to go to that. We're going to take our pit bikes. We're going to put the tent up. We're going to sell some parts, take a couple bikes.
Hopefully sell some motorcycles.
We got a generator in the other day. It was sitting out in the middle of the parking lot on the weekends where they just dropped it off and nobody was there.
I got there on Sunday, and there it was sitting in the parking lot.
That was ridiculous.
Nobody around.
I'm glad nobody stole it. So we're going to have some air conditioning in our camper. Tom, our front office guy, he is going to take his camper, and I'm going to take the trailer with all the good parts in it. And so we'll have some AC to walk into every now and then. And I looked at the weather, and it's a high of like 85.
A month out.
Yeah.
Huh? I can't wait.
I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed on that one. Right. That's what I'm going to do. So anyway, hey, we're going to get into carburetors today. So we get, I would say, 9 calls out of 10, it's a carburetor issue, or they think it is. Right. And most of the time, a bike has been sitting for probably more than a couple years. That's definitely one of the issues,
and sometimes way less than that,
if not the main issue. So we get calls about that, and of course you've got bikes with 1 carb, 2 carbs, 3 carbs, 4 carbs, and sometimes 6. But
we don't see as many of those.
We wanted to talk. I guess I was thinking about a topic for tonight, and it was either going to be the carburetors or titles.
Oh, yeah.
So
they're both 2-hour shows.
They both definitely are 2-hour shows. But anyway, so about the carbs, I think what I was thinking about doing was just starting from the basics and discussing the intake, what's going, where it's coming from, where the gas is coming from, where the air is coming from, where it's going to, and how it does it. How does a carb work? So it looks like Kim brought us 3 examples of carburetors, and so we're going to start with the simplest one.
So what I brought was an example of the dumbest carburetor, although it's pretty sophisticated for 1969. And the reason it's like it is. And then I brought one that's a little smarter. If Dusty Pine's on here, he's going to argue with me that it's smart at all because it's a Harley carburetor. And then the next one is about the most sophisticated one, with maybe one possible exception, before fuel injection. So it's really important to keep in mind that motorcycles, when they're designed by a business to be ridden on the street, they're built in such a way that they do what they think every rider is going to do with it, which is start it up in the morning, ride it to work, run it at all speeds, make it idle, make it go fast, make it use reasonable amounts of fuel.
Rev it 20 times at a stoplight.
Yeah, what
because you
people
have
actually
to rev it to keep it running, right?
Right, what people actually do with them. And to Steve's point earlier, the most common thing we get from people, I think, in general, is I need you to sync my carburetors. That's what they think needs to happen when it's really running crappy. And what they don't tell you is that they've made a lot of modifications to the bike. It's got a different pipe on it. They've taken off the airbox. They've changed some other things in the motorcycle, and maybe it hasn't even been maintained very well. And they want to blame it on the carbs because that's a pretty simple thing to say, well, it's this problem. And unfortunately, it's rarely that problem.
And usually they say it's just something real simple. It's just something easy.
It'll only take you a few minutes. I'll just come with it.
Anyway, hey, look at Caleb Hall down there. We did great work on his carbs, so we were successful.
Yeah,
at least that one time.
Once in a while, we blind hog.
We're glad we did a good job on that for you, Caleb.
Yeah. So again, the dumbest carburetor I have is in my hand right here. This is a carburetor from a CB750 single overhead cam bike.
Not a dumb bike.
Not a dumb bike, but it's a dumb carburetor. And it's dumb because all it does is have a valve that opens. You can see this valve opening as I'm moving it in and out here.
Like that.
Like there it is. The choke's on, so I'm going to take the choke off so you can see a little better. So when I open that, you can see me through the hole, right? There I am going through. So all this does, and it sounds very simple, is when you pull the throttle up, it opens more of the carburetor.
Yep.
And this little needle you see in here, this guy right here, is only one of the things that admits fuel to the carburetor. There's something else in this carburetor that makes it admit fuel, and that's this guy, this little standpipe. The main jet is this one, the big one in the middle, that's on the end of this needle.
And the pilot jet that you hear about all the time.
Pilot jet is right here on this carburetor. It's pressed in, which is
a smaller meter.
Unfortunate. But what it does is when this slide is closed, I'll put it in here the right way. When that slide is closed like that, that pilot jet is still emitting fuel. And it comes in very small amounts.
Your idle is running off of the pilot jet.
Because there's very little air going through here because it's closed. And as you begin to open it, the pilot jet's still participating. When it's only open about that much, which is less than a third, the pilot jet kind of gets out of the mix and it starts running on the main jet.
It's overlapping with the needle.
With the main jet
and the main jet.
Needle, right. And there's something inside here that I didn't take apart that I could show you. But if you look inside here very closely, you'll see that little nub sticking up in the carburetor. Trying to get it here so you can see it.
Yep.
In the throat of the carburetor. That is the other end of the main jet connected to something called an emulsion tube. And that emulsion tube has a bunch of holes in it. It's shaped a particular way, and it admits a certain amount of fuel for the demand of the motorcycle. And like I said, this is a 28 millimeter carburetor for one cylinder of a CB750. That's about 180
which is
cc.
a 4-cylinder.
Yeah.
If you don't know.
4 of these in a bank. And because there's a carburetor in every cylinder, it becomes pretty complicated to make it work properly. But Honda's very smart. And when they built these carburetors, they built them specifically for that bike. And they work very, very well. There's nothing unique about this carburetor. It's common to everything from a lawnmower to some pretty sophisticated automobiles. And they work just like this up until there started to be some changes in emission controls. This is the common thing. But there are many variables even in this. The shape of that needle can change depending upon what the demand is. The shape of this right here is called a cutaway, and it depends on how steep or how narrow that is as to how much air velocity begins to flow through this carburetor when it's beginning to use fuel as the demand rises and you start pulling up on the throttle. And again, this is a dumb carburetor because all it knows is you're pulling this up out of the main jet and letting more air through it. And it says, okay, well, more air, more fuel. That's what I'm going to do. But there are limitations to how this carburetor can mix that. And if you change, for instance, the exhaust system and you put a less restrictive exhaust system on it, it means that the air velocity going in here is less than typically what you might expect if it has a muffler, which puts some resistance there and changes the character of the air going through it. So whenever you do any of those things, all of these things participate in making it more complicated. And there are, for this type of carburetor, there's about 10 different cutaway slides. There's also about 10 more of these needles. In fact, they're even shaped differently. If you buy something like a dyno jet kit, they don't even look like this. This one's just tapered.
Right. A lot of these needles too, a lot of people may not know is there are different varieties. There are different numbers, just like you have a main jet that might go from a 87 up to 140. These are numbered as well. If you take these out of here, you can find the number on them, and that's how you can buy a new one. Another thing is
the numbers on these are how narrow is it, when does it begin to taper, and how small is it in the taper.
So another thing that you can do on these bikes, when you start changing your air box and your exhaust system, your mid throttle, sometimes you can take these out and change the clip setting. There might be 4 or 5 different clip settings on this, where this needle can be lower at the start or higher at the start. And when you go into your mid throttle, it might pull more fuel or it might pull less fuel. And of course, there's other ways of determining that when you're tuning on a bike.
The thing I want to get across is that it's not going to perform like it was designed to perform if you make changes to any of this, because an engine is going to be the most flexible it's ever going to be when it leaves the factory. That means your throttle response is going to be really good. The fuel usage is going to be really good. The power is going to be really good. And when you start changing these things, if you don't change the right combination of things, it just simply makes it harder to ride, harder to use. You see racing vehicles like fuel injected like a Formula One car. There's simply a blade that opens a hole, and the fuel injection has an intelligent box that tells it when to put fuel into the engine. And it doesn't have to go through all this because it's a very sophisticated device. It has intelligence.
A little more modern.
Yeah. And so I was hoping Dusty Pine would be on here because he's going to doubt me on my next comment, which is this carburetor is dumb. This is going to be dumb, dumber, and less dumb. This is a carburetor that's not quite so dumb. And I'm saying it's not quite so dumb because it's a Harley carburetor, and I know there are some people that would laugh if they said, "Oh, you said a Harley carburetor wasn't dumb." It's not dumb. It's not as dumb as this one because it has an accelerator pump. It has a little reservoir down here at the float bowl. Yep, it's real smart. And when you get on the throttle on this one and you open the throttle blade like that, it says, "Oh, well, you're opening the throttle blade. I must need some more fuel because
gives a little extra squirt."
And it squirts a little. It literally squirts gasoline into the carburetor. I don't know if you can see
to give it a little bump,
but there's a standpipe in there that actually squirts fuel into the intake.
Bad lighting.
Yeah, it's very bad. Sorry, we weren't planning for this. But in any case, dumb, not as dumb, and then as sophisticated as they get,
smarter
is one of these. And this one has a throttle blade just like the Harley carburetor does. You can see that one opening and closing in there. But it also has a vacuum chamber with a slide in it, just like this dumb carburetor. And the reason it has both is because when you're asking the engine to speed up by opening this, if you whack that thing open on this one, the engine doesn't respond very well. It just wastes a lot of fuel. It pours in there. The motorcycle doesn't go as much as you might hope that it would. The demand is adjusted by this vacuum chamber and this little diaphragm, and this little cap sits on top of this, and it allows air to be determined high or low pressure on either side of this. And when the demand rises or falls, this slide goes up and down in here just like it would in here, but it's controlled by the combination of this plate and this slide. So these are very good by comparison to this one for fuel management, and they tend to be more flexible. But the point I'm going to make about the difference between the dumb one And this more sophisticated one is when you start changing things like exhaust systems and air boxes, this one really doesn't like it.
Right.
It really makes it more complicated to figure out how
it's a little easier to fix that problem with the older, dumber.
It's
dumber
less
carb.
complicated, but it's still complicated.
That's why they bring them to shops sometimes. That's why we get them in the shop. And every once in a while, we run into something where we might have to reach out and ask a certain question about a particular carb or not.
Yeah. So Skylar says the Holly of the motorcycle world. I think he must be talking about this one.
Is he talking about
it's got
that one?
An accelerator pump.
Yep.
This one, not so
What's
much.
up, Skylar?
This one, there is such a thing as a Harley carburetor on a car that has a vacuum chamber, but it really just opens the second half of the carburetor when it demand requires it. If you were old enough to take the air cleaner off of your parents' Buick just to hear the noise, sometimes that's what you heard is when those secondaries in a 4-barrel carburetor would open. And that has to do with that vacuum chamber on a Holly.
Right.
This one's a little different than a Holly because it's actually metering fuel from this thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Now that you've gone through that progression, one thing that we could go back and talk about just a little bit is, well, for one, people ask about syncing their carbs, and they're thinking that a carb sync is going to be the fix-all.
And that presumes it's a multi. Because
they have a bad running bike. So when you're syncing carbs, basically, if you were to take the dumber carb and put the slide back in, on each carb, you're setting the vacuum exactly the same on each carb, and the adjustment is basically with the slide going up or down, just a little bit. Yeah. On top there is a lock
on that particular carburetor is that way,
an adjustable nut.
But one thing that you have to keep in mind when you're doing carburetors is that each cylinder has a different demand. And you can't just go in and measure something and say, okay, well, they're all the same now. That's a preliminary position, but you really need a tool that looks at vacuum inside the carburetor and determines from the way each cylinder behaves with each carburetor what you need to do, which direction you need to go. More air, less air, more fuel, less fuel. And you hope that when you get it well balanced, it doesn't fight itself. And that's what happens. It starts with a twin. If you've got a motorcycle with 2 cylinders and 2 carburetors, if they're not in synchronization, one cylinder's fighting the other one. And the best example of that I can come up with is the old Triumph 650s. People would buy Bonneville and it would have 2 carburetors and they would say, oh, my bike's faster than your bike. And then there'd be some guy down the street with a TR6 who has 1 carburetor on his 650 and his 650 will outrun that Bonneville with 2 carburetors because the carburetors on the Bonneville got out of whack, and they might still be working at wide open throttle, but along the way they don't work as well, and it fights one another. So you have to be able to get this done on any multi-cylinder engine with more than 1 carburetor. Right.
Another example or another topic on these older carbs is this little screw on the outside. Now, some of the single cylinder carburetors, you'll see a couple screws. You'll see one right here in the middle, and you might see one over here, either on the intake side or on the downwind side. When it's on the airbox side, typically, it's not always the truth, but typically that is an air adjustment screw. And when you're screwing it in, it's less air. When you take it out, it's more air. If this were on the intake side of the engine, typically that would be a fuel screw. And by going out on that fuel screw, you're adding more fuel to the idle mix, or you're taking away more fuel when you turn it in. And on the velocity or on the velocity carb over there, that's probably got a fuel screw, and it's at the bottom of the carb.
Yeah, it's
if I remember right,
here.
Or it's on the top of the carb. Yeah. There it is,
this
right there.
This one's on the top. Now, one other
thing. Is that
one
got a cap on it?
It does not. But what typically you'll see on these Harley carbs, this particular one is a Japanese carburetor that would be on a sportster.
Is that going to have a high and a low?
No. What it's going to that's a really old one. I should have brought that old Chevrolet that I have. This is the fuel screw on the Harley carburetor, and it almost always has a cap pressed in over the top of it, so you can't adjust it.
So you can't change it.
And when you buy, for instance, a jet kit, I'm going to call it, which changes some of the characteristics of the carburetor to make it run better with a modified exhaust or air intake. You're intending to drill that out so you can get in there and adjust that screw, because the screw's still in there, just like it would be if you didn't have the cap in it, but the cap's in place to prevent people from going in and fooling with it. That was a federal thing that all manufacturers did. And these have usually, this one doesn't have it because of the nature of it, but you can see that adjustment screw there. This carburetor would sit on the engine this way. This is the engine side. This is the airbox side. And this is the adjusting for the fuel at low speed. It doesn't adjust anything at high speed, but it adjusts low speed idle and transition fuel. These typically don't have a cap over them, but what they do have is a limiter that's a little casting that sticks out of the air screw itself that allows only about 95 degrees of turn. You know, you can't really turn it more than one. And they're doing that. A
little over a quarter turn.
And they're doing that to try to prevent people from modifying the carburetor to work with things like different air boxes, different exhaust systems. Something you may or may not know is that this is called a velocity stack. And what this does is it sits on the intake side of the carburetor like this. They're always pretty. They're more interesting to look at.
And they look cool.
They look cool. They're more interesting to look at than an air box. However, this changes how much velocity the air has going through the carburetor, and it interferes with virtually everything in the design. What these are for is to smooth the transition of air moving from one place to another. And if they're running without a common air box, if they're not inside a plenum together in a multi-cylinder engine, they make it way more complicated to get the engine to respond because of the change in the fuel or the air velocity going through it. And I know this might be getting into the weeds too much for some people, but what the net of this is, this will only work in a certain RPM range if it's running wide open, just like something else. And every other aspect of the RPM range is going to suffer because you're reducing amount of air going through it.
And not to go on a bunny rabbit trail, but those can actually be installed wrong.
They can.
When they have the little holes on the inside.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like this one has those. And the purpose for that is you've got holes on the inside of the carburetor where it comes in. And if these are covered up, it will not work. And people say, oh shit, you know, my motorcycle won't start.
I need my carb.
Why is that? Again. Well, somebody put velocity stacks on and put them on them. That happens a lot too.
We could go all over the place with these. You want to show your little, jet box?
I think probably the only person I know for sure that's going to know what this is Roger Swartout. If you've ever raced a two-stroke motorcycle, well, Roger does know everything. If you've ever raced a two-stroke motorcycle, you probably have one of these. And this is old school as it gets. It looks like a coaster. It's actually made of rubber. And if you had, I've got several of these, but this one is one that I used with an RD350. And I'm going to, before I open this and show you what's in here, the RD350 was already tuned, already running well. And the only change that might happen would be either the ambient air temperature, the humidity, something in the fuel mixture, whatever. And you had to take these with you to prevent the motorcycle from running like shit, or maybe even seizing it. And there's a whole index of jets in here.
I kind of gave it away earlier.
Yeah, you did a little bit. But this was a common tool for a racing bike back in the day. And it was not uncommon for a four-stroke that ran 10,000 RPM, but those were unusual back in the day. This is two-stroke stuff here. But again, like I said, Roger had been there and done that. He'll know exactly what this is. Keith Carlson will know what this is. But it's not
Moto Manufacturing Company.
Yes, indeed. One of many that might have this. And Mikuni made them. Kian made them. Holly makes them.
Yeah, so
cars.
Since we have a little more time, you can talk about that a little bit. I mean, the main jet right here in the middle. Kim earlier was talking about the pilot jet, this little stack right here, but the main jet right there, those come in all sorts of sizes and so
shapes.
When you start making changes to your air box, your exhaust, a lot of people like to take the baffles out of their exhaust so it sounds awesome. Well, then it starts running like crud at idle, or crud in the mids, or crud at wide open throttle. So you need to start changing all this around to get it right. So now to know how to do that, that's a different story.
Yeah. Sometimes the only reason you might know something about it is because you've traveled the path of not knowing anything about it and trying to get something to work and eventually figuring it out.
Right. TMI, Roger.
Yeah. Yeah. You always say that about anything. Yours is always 4 times bigger than
Mine's
mine.
bigger than yours.
So there's a comment here from Ron Mahoy that's a good one, and we might find a way to get into this one in another show.
Yeah.
When he says brand new with fuel injection and multiple mapping settings for the win is a good plan. Modern bikes that have fuel injection, you can change a lot of things with a laptop. In the particular case of early fuel injected bikes, you can put something on them called a power commander. And what it really does is change the fuel curve a little bit and the timing of the fuel curve, which means you can change things like exhaust and intake and other things and make it a little bit simpler to change it. It's simply an electronic thing versus a mechanical thing like these.
It's nice that they have that out there, though. I mean, those the power units that are on the Harleys, they'll take the exhaust off, they'll put Cobras on, they'll put Vance and Hines on, and then they can remap the power commander and make it run basically perfect without having to go in on a carburetor and change everything.
Yeah. So Roger's clarified because he's a triple bike. That's why his jet box is 4 times larger.
Yeah,
I get that.
And also, not everybody sees when we have the comments on here. I know that if you're watching off of my personal Facebook page, you're probably not seeing. You may or may not see the comments. I guess maybe you are if you're watching the video. But I know that the YouTube comments can't see the Facebook comments.
If you view this later,
we may change that around later. But we're still, even though this is our 22nd episode, we're still trying to learn and get better and do some different things on here.
And we still want to hear from you guys what you want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
We could keep going on for years, but we'd really rather hear what you want to talk about. Well, you really
could have about another 2 or 3 episodes just on the carburetors if you really want to get in depth on these suckers.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't bring was an AMO carburetor, which especially a monoblock carburetor, which is really interesting to look at from the inside out.
Or a flat slide like the CR Carbs.
Or a flat slide like the CR Carbs. Or, and I'll give an example of a motorcycle that came out really well, but it started out differently. Steve has pictures on.
Hey, John Gick, Rich.
On some of our books that and online that show a Resto Mod 750 that was built, I don't know what, 6-7 years ago. And that motorcycle is totally different from the inside out. It has different cylinders. It has a different compression ratio, had a different camshaft, had a different ignition, had flat slide. I think they were 29 millimeter flat slides.
Which bike?
The Dragon bike, the first one.
Oh,
the one that's sitting right
that
over there.
That one right there.
And it also has a modified exhaust system. And when you put all those things together and you work cooperatively to try to get the thing to work, it can be remarkably flexible. And that particular bike is
it's amazing.
For a modified motorcycle, it's more streetable than virtually any I've ever seen.
And I got to give a shout out to why can't I think of Monday's first name?
Bob?
No, Bob's son.
Matt.
Sorry, Matt, if you ever watch this, good golly.
There's Mondays all over
Matt
the place.
Monday built that engine, and I ended up grabbing that engine off of somebody else. It was a chopper build that failed. It was a chopper build that just didn't happen all the way, and it got parted out, and I picked up the front end and the engine, and although I did have to take the top end apart and fix something that had nothing to do with
blow itself up with a
it had nothing to do with Matt. Matt did just a fantastic job building that CB750, but as you were saying, when you add everything that's together on that bike, it really feels like a modern bike.
It does.
And it's actually in the garage because I'm putting a starter on it for Tom McConnelly because he owns the bike now.
And he doesn't
he doesn't want to kick it. But I haven't ridden that bike in about a year and a half or so, and just got on it the other day, and I always forget how smooth that thing is.
Yeah. The only criticism I've ever had with that bike was the seat, and they already changed that, so it's good.
Yeah, it's much better. So anyway, yeah, I think that's about it for tonight's show. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, Rich, your Trimble's right. We could have a whole episode on Amel versus the two strokes, right?
Yeah, there was something I didn't talk about is that even these Kians that are on a Honda or Mikunis or Amels, there's a 2-stroke version and a 4-stroke version, and it has to do with the slide cutaways, like I was showing you. It has to do with the emulsion tubes. It has to do with the way the inside of it is shaped, and that's what makes them different.
Yep.
Because 2-strokes are constantly different.
We didn't talk about rich or lean or any of that stuff, so maybe that can be one of the next.
Yeah, and the next time you're sitting bored to death and you want to look at something on Google the Bernoulli principle. You'll see why carburetors work like they do.
Yeah. And another thing about the carburetors is when you're sitting at idle, it's using your air or your fuel mixture screw along with your pilot jet. And then when you slowly start to give it throttle, it kind of overlaps over into the needle of the main jet. And then it overlaps into from the needle to the main jet. And then when you're on the main jet all the way, it's pretty much 95%.
And again, if you want to look it up, you can go Google carburetor tuning, and you'll see one of those graphs that shows the overlaps. Those are helpful, but they don't tell you how to do it.
Yeah, it's helpful to see kind of how that works. So
it must be Garrett Powell.
I think, hey, Powell, I think what we'll do is maybe one of the next episodes. I know one of them is going to be titles. And I might just have to put it off for a week or two because it could be interesting. It could not. I mean, there's some things you have to do that some people may or may not want to do. Sometimes you have to do that though, to get a title, but the spark plug thing might be good too. Or maybe we could just combine them.
Oh yeah, we could do that
since they go together, spark plugs and titles.
If you need a title, it's probably because you're trying to use something with a spark plug.
Yeah, there you go. So, hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and thanks to those who tune in even after the live session. Yeah. So,
my tip for the day is don't make any changes to this stuff.
Yeah, keep it stocked, right?
Yeah, right.
All right, see y'all later.